The grainy security footage from Dubai International Airport that would later be analyzed frame by forensic investigators showed Neha Ramesh walking through the arrivals terminal on a warm February evening, her designer luggage and radiant smile, suggesting the excitement of someone embarking on what she believed would be a glamorous new chapter, completely unaware that within 90 days her decomposing body would be discovered by Bedouin herders in a shallow grave 20 kilometers outside the city. The victim of a wealthy man whose charm and generosity masked possessive violence that erupted when women he viewed as property attempted to assert independence or leave relationships he controlled through combinations of luxury, manipulation, and ultimately lethal force. The marriage that Neha abandoned to pursue her relationship with Sheikh Omar Al-Mansour had begun 3 years earlier when she met John Miller through a matrimonial service connecting Indian women seeking American residency with American men desiring traditional wives, and their union representing a transaction where she traded her youth and beauty for stability and green card, while he gained companionship and the status of having an exotic younger wife from a culture he romanticized without true understanding. The 29-year-old fashion boutique assistant had arrived in Los Angeles with dreams shaped by Bollywood films and Instagram influencers. Her expectations of American life involving glamour and excitement rather than the suburban Dallas existence that John provided through his accountant's salary, their comfortable but unstimulating lifestyle, creating dissatisfaction that intensified as Neha recognized that her marriage had been a practical arrangement rather than the passionate romance she had secretly hoped might develop despite the transactional nature of their courtship. The isolation that Neha experienced in Dallas stemmed partly from cultural dislocation and partly from John's reserved personality and traditional expectations about gender roles. His assumption that she would be content as housewife, managing their modest home while he worked long hours, creating loneliness that drove her to spend increasing time on social media, where she encountered influencers showcasing luxury lifestyles in Dubai that seemed to represent everything missing from her marriage. The business trip to Dubai that would change Neha's life trajectory had been arranged by the fashion boutique where she worked part-time, her employer sending her to a luxury goods exhibition where high-end retailers connected with potential distributors and wealthy clients. The week-long trip, providing her first exposure to the opulent world of Gulf wealth, where money seemed limitless, and women who attracted the right attention could transform their circumstances overnight through relationships with men whose fortunes dwarfed anything available in middle-class America. Sheikh Omar Al-Mansour's approach to Neha at the exhibition followed patterns he had perfected over years of pursuing foreign women, his initial contact appearing coincidental and respectful, his conversation demonstrating genuine interest in her opinions about fashion and Indian culture, his invitation to dinner at a 7-star hotel restaurant seeming like innocent networking rather than the calculated seduction of a man who collected beautiful women as symbols of his wealth and power. The whirlwind romance that developed during Neha's week in Dubai involved private helicopter tours over the desert, shopping trips to exclusive boutiques, where Omar bought her thousands of dollars worth of designer clothing and jewelry, dinners at restaurants she had only seen in magazines, and increasingly intimate conversations, where he painted pictures of the luxurious life she could have as his companion if she would leave her mundane American existence and embrace the opportunities he offered. The decision to abandon her marriage and move to Dubai was made impulsively during her final evening in the Emirates. Neha's intoxication with Omar's wealth and attention, overwhelming her rational understanding of the risks involved in leaving stable situation for relationship with man she had known less than a week. Her text message to John announcing her decision arriving hours before her scheduled return flight, creating shock and humiliation that would later motivate his tireless efforts to pressure authorities for investigation into her disappearance. The first month of Neha's relationship with Omar conformed to the fantasy he had presented during their courtship, her days filled with shopping, spa treatments, and leisurely brunches with other foreign women who had attached themselves to wealthy Gulf men. The surface glamour, disguising the reality that she had traded one form of dependence for another, far more dangerous, as Omar's possessiveness and controlling behaviors began emerging once she was completely isolated from family and previous support systems. The warning signs that Neha initially dismissed or rationalized included Omar's insistence that she cease all contact with John and limit communication with her family in Mumbai, His jealous reactions when other men looked at her in public, his monitoring of her phone and social media accounts, his criticism of her clothing choices despite having encouraged her to dress provocatively during their courtship, and his expectation that she be available whenever he wanted her company, despite his own frequent absences for business and other women he continued seeing. The discovery that Omar maintained relationships with multiple women simultaneously shattered Neha's illusions about their exclusive partnership. Her realization that she was one of several foreign mistresses he supported, creating anger and humiliation, while also clarifying that she had been naive about his intentions and her actual status in his life, the painful truth forcing her to confront that she had abandoned her marriage for a man who viewed her as temporary entertainment rather than genuine romantic partner. The violence began when Neha questioned Omar about other women, his slap across her face shocking her with its casual brutality, while also revealing the rage beneath his charming exterior. His apology hours later, accompanied by expensive gifts, following classic abuse patterns where violence alternated with generosity, creating psychological confusion that made victims question their own perceptions and hesitate to leave. Relationships that oscillated between luxury and terror. The attempt to leave Dubai and return to America was complicated by Neha's passport being held by Omar, her lack of independent financial resources, and her shame about admitting to family and John that her impulsive decision had been a catastrophic mistake. The practical and psychological barriers trapping her in an increasingly dangerous situation as Omar's violence escalated in response to her expressions of unhappiness or desire to end their relationship. The final weeks of Neha's life were marked by escalating arguments about her desire to leave, Omar's threats about consequences if she attempted to embarrass him by publicly ending their relationship, and his increasingly frequent physical violence that left bruises she concealed beneath makeup and clothing, while desperately seeking ways to escape situation that she recognized might end with her death if she could not find safe exit. Strategy. The murder occurred during an argument at Omar's desert estate, his rage at her continued insistence on leaving erupting into sustained violence that ended with her death from blunt force trauma and strangulation, his subsequent disposal of her body in the desert, facilitated by his aide, Rashid al-Faruqi, who had participated in similar cover-ups for Omar's previous violence against women who had displeased him or attempted to leave, relationships he viewed as his right to control. The missing person report filed by Anjali Ramesh, Neha's younger sister in Mumbai, came 3 weeks after Neha's last contact with her family. The delay, reflecting Anjali's initial assumption that her sister was simply busy enjoying her luxurious new life before growing concern about unanswered messages and calls transformed into alarm that something terrible had happened. Despite the pretty pictures Neha had posted to social media during her first month in Dubai, the initial response from Dubai authorities to international missing person inquiries was dismissive, their suggestion that Neha had simply moved to another location or changed her plans, reflecting both bureaucratic indifference and systemic reluctance to investigate wealthy Emiratis, whose influence and connections made them effectively immune from scrutiny regarding their treatment of foreign women who existed in legal gray zones without full protections of citizenship or strong diplomatic backing. The pressure from John Miller on American consular officials to investigate his estranged wife's disappearance created unexpected alliance between abandoned husband and his wife's family, their shared concern overcoming the awkwardness and anger about the circumstances that had ended the marriage. John's determination to find Neha, driven partly by genuine worry and partly by desire to prove that her decision to leave him had been a foolish mistake with tragic consequences. The discovery of Neha's body by Bedouin herders, who reported the suspicious burial site to local police, transformed the case from missing person inquiry into homicide investigation. The decomposed state of her remains complicating forensic analysis, while also indicating she had been dead for several weeks, her body showing evidence of sustained violence before death, including healed fractures and extensive soft tissue damage, consistent with pattern of escalating physical abuse. The identification of Neha's remains through dental records and DNA comparison with samples provided by her family in India brought devastating confirmation of fears, while also generating international media attention that put pressure on Dubai authorities to conduct thorough investigation. despite the political sensitivities involved in investigating wealthy Emirati with powerful family connections and business relationships that extended to highest levels of government. The forensic pathology report established that Neha had died from combination of blunt force trauma to head and manual strangulation, her injuries indicating sustained assault rather than single blow or brief struggle. The medical evidence painting picture of rage-fueled murder that demonstrated her killer's determination to ensure death, while also suggesting personal relationship rather than random crime or robbery gone wrong. The investigation, led by Detective Layla Hassan, represented rare instance of female Emirati investigator being assigned to high-profile case, her appointment reflecting both her exceptional skills and strategic calculation by superiors who recognized that international attention required appearance of thorough professional inquiry, even if political realities might ultimately constrain prosecution depending on where evidence led. The examination of Neha's phone records and social media accounts revealed extensive communication with Sheikh Omar during her first month in Dubai, followed by sharp decrease in contact with family and friends during final weeks of her life, the pattern consistent with isolation tactics used by abusive partners to separate victims from support networks that might help them recognize danger or escape before violence reached lethal intensity. The interviews with other foreign women in Dubai who had known Neha revealed concerning stories about Omar's reputation for violence and controlling behavior, several women describing similar patterns of initial generosity followed by possessiveness, jealousy, and physical abuse. Though most were reluctant to provide formal statements due to fears about their own precarious status and potential retaliation from powerful men with resources to destroy their lives. The questioning of hotel, staff, and restaurant employees, where Omar and Neha had been seen together, provided additional evidence of escalating relationship problems, witnesses describing heated arguments in public and Neha's visible distress during final weeks before her disappearance, their testimony establishing timeline of deteriorating relationship, and Omar's increasingly aggressive behavior toward women who had apparently disappointed him. The interrogation of Rashid al-Farouchi, Omar's aide, initially yielded denials of any knowledge about Neha's fate, his carefully maintained composure, suggesting both loyalty to his employer and awareness that admitting involvement in body disposal would create serious legal jeopardy. His resistance to questioning, demonstrating the challenges investigators faced in penetrating networks of privilege and complicity that protected wealthy men from accountability. The forensic analysis of Omar's desert estate revealed traces of blood in main residence, despite apparent cleaning efforts, the evidence suggesting that murder had occurred at the property before body was transported to burial site. The physical findings corroborating witness statements about Neha's presence at estate during period when she disappeared from public view. The arrest of Sheikh Omar al-Mansour sent shockwaves through Dubai's elite circles, where his family name and business connections had created assumptions of immunity from legal consequences. The unprecedented action reflecting both strength of evidence and international pressure that made ignoring his apparent involvement politically untenable, despite his powerful allies and their attempts to shield him from investigation. The interrogation revealed a man accustomed to having his way through wealth and influence. Omar's initial denials of involvement in Neha's death, gradually crumbling under presentation of forensic evidence, linking him to crime scene and burial site. His eventual admission that she had died at his estate, accompanied by claims that her death was accidental, result of argument rather than intentional murder, deserving harsh punishment. The confession that Omar provided attempted to minimize his culpability by portraying Neha as unreasonable and demanding, his narrative describing her as ungrateful for the luxury he provided and disrespectful in her continued contact with her American husband, despite his prohibition. His framing of the murder as response to provocation, revealing his view that her resistance to his control justified violence that escalated beyond his intentions. The investigation into Omar's history revealed pattern of violence against previous girlfriends, including 2 other foreign women who had disappeared under suspicious circumstances years earlier. Their cases never seriously investigated due to his family's influence and the systemic devaluation of foreign women's lives in legal and social frameworks that treated them as temporary residents without full protection under law. The forensic evidence linking Rashid al-Farouchi to disposal of Neha's body included tire tracks from his vehicle at burial site soil samples matching the desert location found in his car, and testimony from workers at Omar's estate describing his departure with wrapped bundle on night Neha disappeared, the comprehensive physical evidence overcoming his initial denials and forcing his cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. The testimony that Rashid provided about Omar's instructions to dispose of Neha's body revealed the casual entitlement with which wealthy men treated violence against women. His description of Omar's lack of remorse and expectation that the situation would be easily managed through money and connections, demonstrating the systemic problems enabling such crimes in environments where wealth created effective immunity. The international cooperation required for prosecuting Omar's crimes involved coordination between UAE, Indian, and American authorities, the diplomatic complexities reflecting competing interests, including desire to maintain good relations with wealthy Gulf state, pressure from victims' family and diaspora communities demanding justice, and concerns about precedent-setting implications for how foreign women's deaths were investigated in jurisdictions where they lacked full legal protections. The media coverage of the case attracted global attention due to a combination of elements including abandoned marriage, Gulf wealth and luxury, violence against women, and international jurisdictional issues. Journalists framing story variously as cautionary tale about dangers of pursuing wealth, examination of abuse in relationships involving extreme power imbalances, or critique of legal systems that failed to protect vulnerable foreign women. The victim advocacy organizations that engaged with the case emphasized patterns of violence against migrant women in Gulf states, where legal frameworks and cultural attitudes created environments where abuse often went unpunished, using Neha's murder as example of deadly consequences when wealth and power combined with misogyny and systemic indifference to women's safety. The examination of social media influence on Neha's decisions revealed how carefully curated images of luxury lifestyles in Dubai had shaped her expectations and motivated her abandonment of stable marriage for relationship with a dangerous man. The analysis highlighting broader phenomenon of how digital platforms created distorted perceptions of wealth and happiness that influenced real-world choices with sometimes catastrophic consequences. The investigation into how Omar had controlled Neha through confiscation of her passport revealed common tactic used to trap foreign women in abusive relationships, her lack of travel documents combining with financial dependence and social isolation to create situation where leaving became practically impossible despite escalating violence that threatened her life. The psychological profile developed by prosecution experts described Omar as narcissist with sociopathic traits who viewed women as possessions serving his ego needs, his violence triggered by perceived challenges to his authority or attempts by women to assert independence he viewed as intolerable insubordination, deserving punishment, his murders representing ultimate expression of the control he demanded in all relationships. The testimony from other women who had survived relationships with Omar provided crucial corroboration of abuse patterns and his tendency toward escalating violence, their courage in coming forward despite fears about retaliation demonstrating the importance of previous victims speaking up to establish perpetrator's history and hold him accountable for pattern of violence spanning years. The financial investigation revealed that Omar had used his wealth to silence previous complaints and pay families of women who had been injured or disappeared in his company. The pattern of using money to avoid consequences, demonstrating how systemic corruption and class privilege enabled continued violence against vulnerable women whose lives were valued less than maintaining social harmony and protecting wealthy men's reputations. The criminal trial of Sheikh Omar al-Mansour began 14 months after Neha's body was discovered. The unprecedented prosecution of prominent Emirati for murder of foreign woman, reflecting both international pressure and internal reform movements, pushing for greater accountability and rule of law that applied to all residents regardless of nationality or social status. The prosecution's case built around forensic evidence, linking Omar to crime scene, testimony from Rashid about body disposal, medical examiners' findings about sustained violence indicating prolonged assault rather than accidental death, and statements from other women establishing pattern of abuse that contextualize Neha's murder as predictable outcome of escalating violence rather than isolated incident. The defense strategy attempted to portray Neha as opportunistic gold digger who had abandoned stable marriage to pursue wealth before becoming unreasonable and demanding when relationship did not meet her expectations, their narrative emphasizing her affair with married man and her materialistic motivations, while minimizing Omar's violence as understandable reactions to provocative behavior by ungrateful mistress. The testimony of John Miller provided complicated portrait of abandoned husband who maintained that, despite his anger about how Neha left their marriage, she deserved justice for her murder, and Omar deserved punishment for violence that no woman deserved regardless of her choices or character. His insistence on separating moral judgment about her decisions from condemnation of murder, demonstrating emotional complexity often absent from media narratives. The testimony of Anjali Ramesh proved emotionally devastating as she described her sister's dreams and aspirations, the family pressures that had motivated Neha's practical marriage to John, and her attempts to warn Neha about dangers of leaving stable situation for relationship with man she barely knew, her guilt about not doing more to prevent the tragedy, adding personal dimension to factual evidence. The forensic pathologist's detailed testimony about Neha's injuries established that she had endured sustained violence over time, the healed fractures and scarring indicating pattern of abuse weeks before her death, the medical evidence contradicting defense claims about accidental death during isolated argument and supporting prosecution theory of escalating domestic violence, culminating in murder. The testimony from other foreign women about their experiences with Omar revealed consistent patterns of initial generosity and charm transforming into possessive control, jealous monitoring, restrictions on movement and communication, and eventually physical violence when they attempted to assert independence or leave relationships, their stories demonstrating that Neha's experience was not unique, but rather typical of Omar's interactions with women. The cross-examination by defense attorneys attempted to undermine these women's credibility by emphasizing their continued presence in Dubai and suggesting their testimony was motivated by financial incentives or personal grievances, though their consistent descriptions of similar abuse patterns proved difficult to dismiss as coordinated fabrication or misinterpretation of cultural differences in relationship expectations. The digital evidence, including text messages between Omar and Neha, revealed escalating conflict during final weeks of her life, his threatening language, and explicit statements about consequences if she left him, providing clear evidence of his violent intentions, while also demonstrating his belief that her resistance to his control justified extreme measures to maintain dominance. The testimony of hotel staff, describing arguments and Neha's visible bruising during final weeks, established that violence was known to others who failed to intervene due to Omar's status and power, their silence reflecting broader social problems where wealth created immunity and bystanders avoided involvement in situations that might create personal risk or social complications. The expert testimony about intimate partner violence patterns in relationships involving extreme power imbalances explained how Omar's wealth and Neha's vulnerable immigration status created dynamic where leaving became practically impossible despite escalating danger, the analysis providing framework for understanding why she had not simply departed when violence began. The closing arguments presented contrasting narratives about responsibility and justice, prosecution emphasizing that regardless of Neha's character or choices, murder was a criminal act deserving punishment, and that Omar's wealth and status should not shield him from consequences of lethal violence, while defense maintained that cultural misunderstandings and Neha's provocative behavior warranted mitigation of charges and punishment. The jury deliberations in Emirati court system differed from Western models, with panel of judges rather than citizens evaluating evidence and determining verdict, their decision reflecting both legal standards and political considerations, in case that had generated international attention and scrutiny of UAE justice system's willingness to hold wealthy citizens accountable for crimes against foreign women. The verdict of guilty on murder charges was delivered on a humid afternoon in late August, the conviction representing historic moment in UAE legal history, as prominent Emirati faced serious consequences for killing foreign woman, the outcome reflecting both strength of evidence and international pressure that had made acquittal politically untenable, despite Omar's powerful family connections and their attempts to influence proceedings. The sentencing phase revealed the limitations of reform, with Omar receiving 25-year prison sentence rather than death penalty that might have been imposed for similar crime in other contexts. The relatively lenient punishment, reflecting his status and family influence, while still representing unprecedented accountability for violence against foreign women in jurisdiction, where such cases had typically been dismissed or inadequately prosecuted. The reaction to verdict and sentence divided along predictable lines, with women's rights organizations praising conviction while criticizing inadequate punishment, Omar's family and supporters maintaining his innocence while claiming he was scapegoated for political reasons, and international observers viewing outcome as modest progress in system that still heavily favored wealthy men despite reforms. The sentencing of Rashid al-Farouchi to 12 years for accessory to murder and disposal of body represented his reduced culpability due to cooperation with prosecutors, though victim advocates argued that his willing participation in concealing murder deserved harsher punishment than given despite pragmatic necessity of his testimony for securing Omar's conviction. The victim impact statements from Neha's family provided heartbreaking accounts of their loss. Her mother's testimony about daughter who had been beautiful and ambitious, her father's anger about the man who had murdered her when she tried to leave dangerous relationship, and Anjali's description of how Neha's death had destroyed their family's hopes and dreams, creating emotional context for understanding human costs beyond legal abstractions. The civil litigation filed by Neha's family against Omar seeking compensation for wrongful death represented additional accountability mechanism, and the financial judgment providing some measure of justice, while also establishing precedent for holding wealthy perpetrators financially responsible for violence against foreign women, even when criminal penalties remained inadequate due to systemic biases and political considerations. The policy changes prompted by international attention to Neha's case included enhanced protections for foreign women in domestic worker and relationship contexts, improved coordination between authorities and embassies for investigating missing person reports, and increased training for law enforcement about intimate partner violence patterns and the particular vulnerabilities faced by foreign women in relationships with wealthy local men. The establishment of support services for foreign women in abusive relationships represented meaningful systemic improvement, providing resources for safe housing, legal assistance, emergency travel documents, and counseling that addressed both practical and psychological barriers to leaving dangerous situations before violence escalated to murder. The impact on Dubai's image as safe destination for foreign workers and tourists included concerns about treatment of women and efficacy of legal protections, the negative publicity prompting government efforts to emphasize reforms and improved safeguards, while also generating defensive reactions about cultural sovereignty and resistance to Western criticism of traditional gender relations and legal frameworks. The ongoing imprisonment of Omar in facility housing white-collar criminals, rather than violent offenders, reflected his continued privileged status, the comfortable conditions of his incarceration contrasting sharply with harsh treatment of lower-class prisoners, while demonstrating that even when wealthy men faced consequences, systemic inequalities ensured, their punishment remained less severe than others convicted of similar crimes. The relationship between John Miller and Neha's family evolved from initial awkwardness to genuine connection through their shared advocacy work. His public statements that Neha deserved justice despite their failed marriage, earning respect from her relatives who had initially blamed him for her unhappiness, their reconciliation demonstrating that tragedy sometimes created unlikely alliances among those united by grief and determination to prevent similar losses. The media analysis of coverage patterns revealed problematic tendencies to focus on Neha's choices and character rather than Omar's violence. The persistent victim blaming, reflecting broader cultural problems with how society discusses intimate partner violence and the extent to which women's behavior is scrutinized more intensely than men's violence in narratives about relationship crimes. The feminist critique emphasized how Omar's sense of masculine entitlement and view of women as possessions whose resistance justified violence represented extreme manifestation of patriarchal attitudes pervading many cultures. Using Neha's murder as example of deadly consequences when wealth and power combined with misogyny in contexts where legal systems inadequately protected women's rights and autonomy. The 5-year anniversary of Neha's murder found both her family and John Miller continuing advocacy work that had transformed their grief into meaningful efforts to protect other foreign women from similar fates. Their establishment of foundation, providing support services and legal assistance, while also funding research into intimate partner violence in contexts involving extreme wealth and power imbalances. The ongoing imprisonment of Omar al-Mansur revealed his continued refusal to accept full responsibility for Neha's murder, his letters and statements portraying himself as victim of cultural misunderstandings and Neha's provocations, his lack of genuine remorse, confirming the personality disorders that had enabled his violence and suggesting he remained dangerous to women despite incarceration. The memorial scholarship, established in Neha's name, supported young Indian women pursuing careers in fashion and design, transforming her tragedy into opportunities for others, while honoring her professional ambitions and creative talents that had been cut short by violence when she sought glamorous life that proved deadly trap. The research examining how social media influenced women's migration and relationship decisions revealed disturbing patterns, where carefully curated images of luxury lifestyles created unrealistic expectations and motivated risky choices. Neha's case illustrating dangers of pursuit of Instagram-worthy existence without adequate awareness of costs and vulnerabilities involved in relationships with wealthy men in foreign contexts. The policy achievements inspired by advocacy following Neha's death included enhanced embassy monitoring of citizens in potentially dangerous relationships, improved emergency services for women seeking to leave abusive situations, and strengthened penalties for passport confiscation and other tactics used to trap foreign women in violent relationships. The ongoing support network for other women who had survived relationships with abusive wealthy men in Gulf states created community among those who understood particular challenges of leaving situations where perpetrators' money and influence made seeking help dangerous, their shared experiences generating practical knowledge about escape strategies and recovery processes. The technological innovations in safety planning included secure messaging applications and emergency alert systems specifically designed for women in high-risk relationships, where monitoring and control tactics limited their ability to seek help through conventional channels. Several apps specifically citing Neha's case as motivation for developing tools that might save lives. The cultural conversations prompted by the case included difficult examinations of how pursuit of wealth and status created vulnerabilities to exploitation and violence, with particular focus on how economic inequality motivated women to enter relationships involving extreme power imbalances that enabled abuse without adequate protections or exit strategies. The impact on marriage migration patterns revealed mixed effects, with some Indian women becoming more cautious about marriages primarily motivated by immigration status or financial security, while economic pressures continued driving similar arrangements despite heightened awareness of potential dangers involved in relationships with significant power disparities. The legal scholarship examining the case analyzed how wealth functioned as shield against accountability in intimate partner violence prosecutions. Omar's reduced sentence, despite overwhelming evidence demonstrating that class privilege continued affecting outcomes even when systems ostensibly committed to equality and rule of law, regardless of defendant's status. The ongoing monitoring of Omar's prison behavior suggested he maintained narcissistic personality structure and entitlement attitudes that had characterized his free life, his interactions with guards and other prisoners, revealing continued expectation of special treatment and lack of insight into his crimes or their impact on victims and families. The relationship between Anjali and other family members who had lost loved ones to intimate partner violence in international contexts created support network spanning continents. Their shared experiences of navigating complex legal systems and cultural barriers, creating bonds that transcended differences in their specific circumstances. The 10th anniversary of Neha's murder marked significant milestone in assessing long-term impacts of her case across multiple dimensions, including policy reforms, cultural shifts in how society discussed intimate partner violence involving wealth and power, and ongoing advocacy work, transforming personal tragedy into systemic improvements protecting vulnerable women. The documentary film examining Neha's case attracted international attention through streaming platforms, generating renewed public interest in how wealth enabled violence and the particular vulnerabilities faced by foreign women in relationships with powerful men whose resources and influence made them effectively immune from accountability in systems that prioritize their interests over women's safety. The academic research examining intimate partner homicide in contexts involving extreme wealth contributed to enhanced understanding of how money functioned not only as tool of control through financial dependence, but also as shield, protecting perpetrators from consequences. Omar's case illustrating patterns where class privilege affected everything from initial investigation through sentencing and conditions of imprisonment. The policy advocacy addressing passport confiscation as control tactic achieved meaningful reforms in several countries, including enhanced penalties and emergency protocols for helping women whose travel documents had been seized by abusive partners. The changes representing concrete improvements inspired by awareness of tactics that had trapped Neha. The cultural evolution, in discussions about social media influence on life choices, reflected growing recognition that Instagram and other platforms created distorted perceptions of wealth and happiness that motivated risky decisions, with particular concern about how influencer culture shaped young women's aspirations without providing realistic information about costs and dangers involved. The ongoing imprisonment costs for Omar over 10 years had exceeded several $million in specialized facility, where his family's continued influence ensured comfortable conditions, the expense generating periodic debates about whether wealthy criminals should receive standard treatment rather than privilege, though political considerations made reforms unlikely despite public criticism. The establishment of the Neha Ramesh Foundation created permanent institution dedicated to supporting foreign women in potentially dangerous relationships, providing emergency services, legal assistance, and educational programs that addressed both practical barriers to leaving abusive situations and psychological factors that kept women trapped despite escalating violence. The generational impact on Neha's family included younger cousins who knew her only through stories, their understanding of her filtered through family narratives that balanced honest acknowledgement of her choices with celebration of her ambitions, while condemning the violence that ended her life. The complex legacy, resisting simple moral lessons about women's decisions or appropriate responses to desire for better circumstances. The international cooperation frameworks developed partially in response to Neha's case improved coordination between embassies and local authorities for investigating missing person reports and suspicious situations involving foreign nationals, establishing protocols that facilitated more effective responses than the bureaucratic delays and dismissals that had characterized initial handling of her disappearance. The victim advocacy movement that was strengthened through work honoring Neha's memory achieved remarkable success in raising awareness about intimate partner violence in contexts involving extreme power imbalances, supporting survivors, and pushing for systemic changes that protected vulnerable women while holding perpetrators accountable regardless of wealth or social status. The ongoing research into why women like Neha dismissed warning signs revealed complex factors including initial genuine affection being exploited, gradual escalation, making it difficult to identify a clear moment when relationship became dangerous, isolation tactics preventing access to objective perspectives, and practical barriers including financial dependence and passport control that made leaving increasingly difficult as relationship progressed. The legal precedents established through Omar's prosecution influenced subsequent cases involving violence against foreign women in Gulf states, creating frameworks for investigation and accountability that represented meaningful progress despite continued systemic biases and the reality that wealth still heavily influenced outcomes in intimate partner violence cases. The 15th anniversary of Neha's murder found Omar al-Mansour at age 59, his incarceration having aged him significantly, while apparently producing no fundamental transformation in personality structure or acceptance of full responsibility for violence that ended young woman's life when she attempted to leave relationship he viewed as his right to control. The comprehensive evaluation of policy changes, inspired by Neha's case, revealed meaningful progress in some areas, including enhanced protections for foreign women, improved missing person investigation protocols, and increased public awareness about intimate partner violence warning signs, while structural issues, including wealth, privilege, and gender inequality, showed limited improvement. despite decades of advocacy. The academic literature examining the case had expanded across multiple disciplines, including criminology, gender studies, migration studies, and sociology, each field finding insights in intersection of factors including economic inequality, social media influence, power imbalances in international relationships, and systemic failures to protect vulnerable women from violence by wealthy men. The ongoing support networks for survivors of intimate partner violence in international contexts created communities among women navigating complex cultural and legal systems, their shared experiences generating knowledge about manipulation tactics, practical barriers to leaving dangerous relationships, and strategies for achieving safety despite wealth and power disparities. The technological advances in safety planning incorporated lessons from Neha's case, with improved emergency response systems, better coordination between embassies and local authorities, and enhanced verification procedures for background checks on potential partners in international relationship contexts, though limitations remained in protecting women once they were isolated from support systems. The feminist analysis continued emphasizing how Omar's murders illustrated deadly consequences of masculine entitlement and treatment of women as possessions. His execution of Neha, when she attempted to leave, demonstrating extreme manifestation of attitudes that pervaded many cultures where women's autonomy was viewed as threat to male authority deserving violent suppression. The cultural legacy of Neha's case extended beyond specific policy achievements to include broader conversations about how economic inequality motivated risky relationship choices, how wealth functioned as both attraction and trap for women seeking better circumstances, and how legal systems needed strengthening to protect vulnerable individuals from partners whose resources enabled sophisticated control and violence. The memorial events, organized annually, continued drawing participants from multiple communities, including domestic violence survivors, advocates for migrant women's rights, members of Indian diaspora organizations, and individuals committed to preventing intimate partner violence through education, support services, and cultural change, challenging systems that enabled wealthy men's violence. The impact on social media platforms included enhanced warnings about risks of pursuing relationships based primarily on displays of wealth, improved reporting mechanisms for accounts promoting unrealistic lifestyle expectations, and educational initiatives about how curated images distorted reality in ways that influenced dangerous real-world decisions. The ongoing investigation into whether Omar had committed other crimes against women revealed several suspicious disappearances of foreign women who had been involved with him over previous decades. Though lack of bodies or conclusive evidence prevented prosecution, the uncertainty creating haunting questions about full extent of his violence during years when wealth and influence provided immunity. The 20th anniversary of Neha Ramesh's murder found her family and John Miller continuing advocacy work that had consumed their lives. Their determination to transform tragedy into protection for others sustained across 2 decades, despite inevitable exhaustion and the knowledge that systemic problems enabling violence against women persisted despite meaningful progress in specific areas. The comprehensive assessment of cultural shifts revealed mixed outcomes, with increased awareness about intimate partner violence in relationships involving wealth and power, coexisting with continued economic pressures, motivating women to enter dangerous situations. Social media influences creating unrealistic expectations despite warnings, and wealth still functioning as shield, protecting perpetrators despite reforms, ostensibly ensuring equal justice. The generational impact included younger women who knew Neha's story as cautionary tale rather than personal loss, their understanding shaped by educational programs and media coverage that emphasized warning signs, while sometimes oversimplifying complex factors that had contributed to her choices and made leaving difficult once relationship became dangerous. The academic research examining long-term outcomes for intimate partner homicide perpetrators from privileged backgrounds revealed that individuals like Omar rarely develop genuine remorse even after decades of incarceration, their personality structures and sense of entitlement proving remarkably resistant to therapeutic intervention or natural reflection that time might facilitate. The ongoing costs of Omar's imprisonment had exceeded $3 million over 20 years in facility, where his family's influence continued, ensuring comfortable conditions, the expense representing taxpayer burden, while demonstrating that even when wealthy men face consequences, systemic inequalities ensured their punishment remained less harsh than others convicted of similar crimes. The victim advocacy organizations that had been strengthened through work inspired by Neha's case had achieved significant victories, including enhanced legal protections for foreign women, improved support services, strengthened international cooperation for investigating crimes against tourists and migrants, and increased cultural awareness about intimate partner violence patterns in relationships involving power disparities. The technological innovations in traveler safety and domestic violence prevention incorporated multiple lessons from Neha's case, with improved emergency response systems, better coordination between embassies and local authorities, secure communication channels for women in dangerous situations, and enhanced background verification services for international relationships, though practical limitations remained in protecting women once isolated from support networks. The cultural conversations about appropriate responses to economic inequality and limited opportunities continued evolving, with growing recognition that, while pursuing better circumstances was understandable, relationships involving extreme power imbalances required careful assessment of risks and maintenance of exit strategies, including independent financial resources, secure travel documents, and strong connections to support networks that could provide help if situations became dangerous. The Memorial Scholarship recipients who had benefited from funding established in Neha's name numbered over 70 young women pursuing fashion and design careers, their achievements representing positive legacy that her family had created from tragedy, transforming her death into opportunities for others to pursue creative ambitions without needing to sacrifice safety or autonomy for financial security. The relationship dynamics that had led to Neha's murder continued resonating with contemporary audiences who recognized familiar patterns of wealth as attraction and trap, social media, distorting perceptions of luxury lifestyles, and controlling behaviors masked as generosity, creating opportunities for education about healthy relationship skills and warning signs that transcended cultural boundaries. The legal frameworks for protecting foreign women in Gulf states had improved meaningfully, due partly to international pressure following Neha's case. Though implementation remained inconsistent and wealthy, perpetrators still often escaped full accountability, demonstrating that achieving genuine equality under law required sustained effort beyond initial reforms that could be undermined through systemic biases and political considerations. The questions about whether Neha bore responsibility for her choices versus deserving compassion as victim remained contested across different cultural and ideological perspectives, the debates reflecting broader disagreements about women's autonomy, appropriate responses to economic pressure, and extent to which personal decisions that proved unwise diminished entitlement to protection from violence. The ongoing monitoring of intimate partner homicide statistics revealed that cases like Neha's occurred regularly across different contexts, suggesting that psychological and social factors producing her murder represented broader patterns, requiring sustained attention from researchers, policymakers, and communities committed to preventing violence against women regardless of their nationality, relationship status, or choices about pursuing better circumstances. 25 years after Neha Ramesh abandoned her stable marriage to pursue glamorous life with Sheikh Omar Al-Mansour, only to be murdered 90 days later when she attempted to leave the relationship that proved deadly trap, her story continues, serving as powerful reminder of the intersection between economic inequality, social media distortion of reality, wealth as tool of control, and intimate partner violence that transcends cultural boundaries while manifesting in culturally specific ways that require nuanced understanding. The Neha Ramesh Foundation has become an internationally recognized institution that has directly assisted over 4,000 women in dangerous relationships while funding research, educational programs, and policy advocacy, contributing to measurable improvements in how intimate partner violence involving power imbalances is prevented, investigated, and prosecuted across multiple jurisdictions and cultural contexts. The legislative achievements inspired by advocacy following Neha's murder include enhanced protections for foreign women in relationships with wealthy local men, improved missing person investigation protocols, strengthened penalties for passport confiscation and financial control tactics, mandatory domestic violence training for consular officials, and increased funding for support services addressing specific vulnerabilities faced by migrant women. The ongoing imprisonment of Omar al-Mansour represents consequence of his choice to murder Neha rather than accept her autonomy and right to leave relationship. His 25 years of incarceration, demonstrating that even wealthy men with powerful connections eventually face accountability when evidence is overwhelming and international pressure makes ignoring crimes politically untenable. Though his comfortable conditions and reduced sentence compared to others convicted of similar crimes reveal that class privilege continues affecting justice system outcomes. The cultural legacy extends beyond specific policy achievements to include broader conversations about how economic inequality motivates risky choices, how social media creates dangerous distortions of reality, how wealth functions as both attraction and weapon in abusive relationships, and how legal systems must strengthen protections for vulnerable individuals regardless of their decisions about pursuing better circumstances or their perceived worthiness as victims. The memorial sites and scholarship programs ensure that Neha's ambitions and creative talents will be remembered alongside tragedy of her murder, creating lasting positive impact that honors person she was, rather than reducing her to cautionary tale about women's choices, while also acknowledging that her story contains important lessons about recognizing warning signs and maintaining safety even when pursuing dreams of better life. The family healing demonstrates that recovery from traumatic loss requires sustained effort across decades, with different family members processing grief through various means, including advocacy work, maintaining connections with others who understood their experience, and finding ways to transform suffering into meaningful improvements that might prevent similar losses for other families. The story of Neha Ramesh serves as permanent reminder that while pursuing wealth and status represents understandable response to economic pressure and desire for better circumstances, relationships involving extreme power imbalances require vigilant attention to warning signs, including controlling behaviors, isolation tactics, and violence, and that wealth and charm never justify abuse or excuse murder when women assert their fundamental right to leave dangerous situations regardless of commitments made or benefits received.